The cantina's dim lights flickered across rows of empty bottles, casting dancing shadows on the metal walls. Blue smoke drifted from exotic pipes, carrying the scent of burning crystal leaves that made most humans dizzy but helped alien veterans forget their nightmares. The air hummed with dozens of different languages, clicks, whistles, and harmonics that no human throat could produce. Commander Vexstar sat alone in the darkest corner, his massive frame hunched over a glass of something that glowed purple in the low light. His thick, chitinous shell was crisscrossed with scars, some from energy weapons, others from human projectiles that had somehow punched through armor designed to stop plasma cannons. One of his forearms ended in a crude mechanical replacement. Its servos worried softly as he lifted his drink. Most aliens on the station avoided him. Not because he was dangerous, though he certainly was, but because of what those scars represented. The human war had ended 20 years ago. But veterans like Vexstar carried its memories like infected wounds that never quite healed. Journalist Crindle approached the table nervously, his translator device chirping as it processed the ambient conversations. He was young for his species, barely past his first molting, with smooth green skin that hadn't yet developed the tough scales of maturity. His recording equipment looked expensive but simple, a small crystal that would capture not just words, but emotional resonance. Commander Vexstar. Crindle's voice squeaked slightly. I'm from the Galactic Archives. We're collecting veteran testimonies for the historical record. Vexstar's compound eyes fixed on him, each facet reflecting the cantina's lights like a broken mirror. Another researcher. How many of you have I seen? 50? 100? He gestured to the empty chair across from him. Sit. Order something strong. You'll need it. Crindle activated his recorder and placed it on the scarred metal table. The device hummed to life, its crystal core beginning to glow. The archives show you served in the 7th Coalition Fleet, participated in 12 major engagements, received the Star of Valor twice. Decorations. Vexstar's laugh was a harsh, clicking sound. They gave those to anyone who survived long enough to file a report. He leaned back, his mechanical arm tapping against the table. You want to know about fighting humans? Everyone thinks they know the story. The reports say, we faced a technologically inferior species with decent reflexes and stubborn tactical doctrine. The old warrior's eyes grew distant, focusing on something beyond the cantina walls. The reports are lies. Comfortable lies we tell ourselves so we can sleep at night. Crindle's recorder pulsed brighter, sensing the emotional weight in Vexstar. Voice, what do you mean? I mean humans don't fight like any species we've encountered. They don't fight like rational beings at all. Vexstar's scarred mandibles clicked together. Let me tell you about Proxima Station, our first real battle with them. Command thought it would be a simple sweep. Clear out a minor human outpost, secure the system, move on to the next target. The cantina seemed to grow quieter around them, as if the very walls were leaning in to listen. Proxima Station was nothing special. Converted asteroid, maybe 2 kilometers across, with basic defensive systems and a small garrison. Said 200 humans, maximum. We brought 3,000 troops for assault cruisers and enough firepower to crack a moon. Vexstar's mechanical fingers drummed against the table. Should have been over in hours. A quick orbital bombardment, then Marines to secure whatever was left. He paused to drain his glass, the purple liquid leaving phosphorescent trails on his lips. The first thing that went wrong was their defensive fire. Not because it was particularly accurate or powerful, but because it never stopped. Every weapon they had kept firing until it was physically destroyed. No tactical retreats, no conservation of ammunition, no attempt to surrender when the situation became hopeless. Crindle made notes on his datapad, stylus moving rapidly. Standard. Desperate defense protocols. Nothing standard about it. Vexstar's voice carried a note of something almost like respect. When our first assault wave landed, I led the breach team into their command center. That's where I met Captain Hansel. The old warrior's eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the cantina's walls. Seeing not the smoky interior but the twisted metal corridors of a dying space station, Hansel was standing behind a barricade of welded metal plates, his left arm hanging useless at his side. Bone fragments were visible through his torn uniform, and his blood was pooling on the deck plates. But he was still coordinating defensive positions, still calling out orders to his troops. Vextar touched his scarred carapace unconsciously. He put 3 plasma rounds through my chest armor before I even saw him properly. Should have killed me instantly, but Coalition armor is thick. Should have killed him too, my return fire. Took out half the wall he was hiding behind. The journalist's stylus stopped moving, but he survived. He kept fighting. For 18 hours, Hansel commanded that defense with a shattered arm and internal bleeding that should have dropped him. In minutes, when their communication systems were destroyed by our bombardment, the humans adapted. They started using their own blood to mark rally points on the walls. Simple symbols that meant fall back. Hold position. Ammunition here. Crindle felt a chill run down his spine despite the cantina's warmth. Their own blood? Efficient field expedient? Vextar continued matter-of-factly. It's always available, highly visible, and the smell helped coordinate units in the smoke and darkness. But it wasn't just tactical efficiency, or something else, a message in that blood. It said we're willing to bleed for every meter of ground. The old warrior's mechanical arm word as he reached for another drink. When we finally breached their last defensive position, Hansel was still standing, still shooting, still calling out orders to soldiers who were already dead. The medical scanner we used later showed he'd been running on combat stimulants that should have killed him 6 hours earlier. His heart should have exploded, but somehow he kept going. Voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But Hansel wasn't unique. Sergeant Minho operated heavy weapons for 12 hours with a punctured lung, coughing blood onto his targeting display. Medek Youngji treated wounded soldiers while her own blood pooled beneath her feet from a stomach wound. None of them retreated. None of them surrendered. They didn't even seem to acknowledge they were dying. The cantina had gone completely silent now. Even the background hum of conversation had stopped as other patrons unconsciously listened to the old warrior's tale. The final assault took 36 hours, Vextar continued. We had to clear every room, every corridor, every maintenance shaft. The humans fought from positions that should have been indefensible, held ground that tactical doctrine said was worthless, and died for objectives that made no strategic sense. He paused, his compound eyes reflecting the recorder's glow. We won Proxima Station. Reports show a complete coalition victory with acceptable casualties. But those reports don't mention what we lost that day. Crindle waited, sensing the weight of revelation approaching. We lost the certainty that humans were just another species to conquer. We lost the comfortable assumption that all intelligent life values self-preservation above duty. We lost the belief that war was just a rational extension of politics. Vextar's mechanical fingers closed into a fist. What we found instead was something that shouldn't exist in a rational universe, a species that fights not to win, but to ensure their enemies understand the true cost of victory. The old warrior stood slowly, his scarred frame towering over the small table. That was just the beginning, journalist. Just the first lesson in a war that taught us more about the nature of courage than any species should ever have to learn. The cantina's atmosphere grew heavier as Vextar reached for another drink, his mechanical hand trembling slightly. Purple liquid cast an eerie glow on his scarred features as he stared into its depths, seeing memories that refused to fade. Kepler 4 to be, he began, his voice barely audible above the ambient hum of alien conversations. A frozen rock orbiting a dying star. Nothing there worth fighting for except pride and the stubborn refusal to let humans establish another foothold. In coalition space, Crindle adjusted his recorder, leaning closer to catch every word. The crystal's glow pulsed faster, responding to the emotional intensity radiating from the old warrior. The planet's surface was mostly ice and volcanic rock, carved with deep canyons and underground cave systems. Perfect place for someone to hide if they knew what they were doing. Vextar's compound eyes reflected the recorder's light like broken mirrors. 300 humans had taken shelter in an old mining complex built into the mountainside. Had 15,000 troops, orbital support, and enough firepower to turn that mountain into glass. The old commander paused, his mandibles clicking in what might have been remembered anxiety. Standard siege protocol was simple. Surround the complex, cut off supply lines, wait for surrender or starvation. Every species in the galaxy understood the mathematics of siege warfare. You calculate food supplies, water reserves, ammunition, stores, and then you wait for biology to do the work. Crindle made notes on his datapad, stylus moving rapidly. But the humans didn't follow standard protocols. They threw out the entire playbook. Vexstar's mechanical fingers drummed against the table in an irregular rhythm. The first sign something was wrong came on day 3 of the siege. Lieutenant Taman appeared at the edge of our perimeter like a ghost materializing from the frozen ground. Cantina seemed to grow colder as Vexstar described the encounter. Our sensors should have detected him from kilometers away. Coalition. Technology can track a heartbeat through solid rock, identify individual scent signatures in a hurricane, hear whispered conversations across a battlefield. But Taman just ... appeared. Vexter's voice carried a note of grudging admiration mixed with old terror. He stood there for exactly 10 seconds, perfectly still, wearing standard human combat armor that should have lit up our detection grid. Like a signal flare, our sentries saw him clearly, a human soldier, weapon lowered, just watching our positions with what looked like casual interest. The old warrior's scarred carapace rippled as he shifted in his seat, then he was gone. Not running, not diving for cover, just ... absent, like he'd never been there at all. Our motion sensors showed nothing. Thermal imaging found no trace. Even our chemical sniffers couldn't detect human pheromones in the area. Crindle's stylus stopped moving. Equipment malfunction. That's what we thought, till Corporal Suben appeared the next morning in a completely different sector. Vexstar's laugh was bitter. Same pattern. Perfectly visible for exactly 10 seconds, then vanishing without triggering a single detection system. Always just long enough for our troops to see her, never long enough to get a targeting lock. The memories seemed to press down on Vexstar like a physical weight. They were playing with us, demonstrating that our siege perimeter was meaningless, our superior technology was useless, that we were not the hunters we believed ourselves to be. The psychological warfare had begun subtly, Vexstar explained. Coalition patrols would return to their positions to find small changes. A helmet moved 3 centimeters to the left. A weapon safety engaged when it had been left off. A soldier's personal journal opened to a different page. Nothing threatening at first. Vexstar continued. Just evidence that humans had been there, close enough to touch our equipment, invisible to our sensors and sentries. The implications were terrifying. If they could move our gear around, they could plant explosives. If they could read our journals, they knew our tactical plans. If they could approach that close undetected, they could kill us in our sleep. But the humans weren't interested in quick kills. They wanted something far more valuable than military victory. Private High 1 left. The first gift on day 12, Vexstar's voice carried an edge of remembered disbelief. Coalition helmet, polished to mirror brightness, placed on a rocky outcropping directly in the center of our main patrol route. Impossible to miss, impossible to ignore. The helmet had been disassembled with surgical precision, every component, laid out in perfect geometric patterns that formed symbols in the human writing system, and the message, when translated, was simple. We see you. Sergeant Jinwoo took the psychological operations to another level entirely, Vexstar continued, his mechanical arm tapping against the table in nervous rhythm. He began shadowing our patrols, staying close enough to be sensed, but never close enough to be located. Troops would report feeling watched, hearing footsteps in the snow that matched their own pace, catching glimpses of movement in their peripheral vision. The effect on coalition morale had been devastating. Soldiers began jumping at shadows, firing at thermal signatures that turned out to be heated rocks, reporting human contacts that investigation teams could never confirm. Jinwoo would follow the same patrol for days, learning their routes, their habits, their individual quirks. Then he'd start leaving evidence of his presence. Hot meal placed on a guard's usual rest spot, still steaming in the freezing air. Personal items moved from one patrol member's pack to another's. Equipment redistributed so efficiently that it took hours to notice anything was missing. Vexstar's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The note that came with that first. Hot meal haunts me still. Written in perfect coalition standard, it said simply, "You looked hungry. The stew is safe to eat. We added extra protein powder from your own supplies." The implications had been clear. The humans weren't just demonstrating their ability to move undetected through coalition positions. They were showing genuine concern for enemy soldiers' welfare, while simultaneously proving they could poison any meal, eliminate any target they chose. But they didn't, Vexter emphasized. That was the truly terrifying part. They had every opportunity to inflict casualties, to damage our equipment, to turn the siege into open warfare. Instead, they chose to wage a campaign for our minds. The psychological pressure had mounted steadily. Coalition soldiers began reporting strange dreams, nightmares, where humans spoke to them in their own languages, offering food and warmth while explaining exactly how many different ways they could have killed each dreamer. "My unit started breaking down by month 6, Vexstar admitted. Veteran soldiers with decades of combat experience were jumping at shadows, seeing human faces in rock formations, hearing human voices in the wind. We had troops shooting at their own reflections, calling in artillery strikes on empty positions, requesting medical evacuation for injuries that existed only in their minds. The humans had turned the Coalition's own advanced sensory capabilities against them. Superior hearing meant every sound might be a human footstep. Enhanced smell meant every scent could carry human pheromones. Improved vision meant every shadow might hide a human observer. 18 months, Vexstar repeated, his voice carrying the weight of remembered exhaustion. 547 days of constant psychological pressure.
Ow.
The humans never attacked our positions directly, never tried to break the siege through conventional military action. They simply made it impossible for us to maintain the siege. Coalition Command had rotated fresh troops into the area every 3 months, but the effect remained the same. Within weeks, new arrivals were reporting the same phantom contacts, the same feeling of being constantly observed, the same gradual erosion of confidence and sanity. The end came not with a bang, but with a whimper, Vexstar concluded. Coalition High Command declared the siege complete and ordered evacuation. The official reports claimed successful containment of enemy forces with minimal Coalition casualties. The truth was simpler and more humbling. He drained his glass, the purple liquid leaving phosphorescent traces on his lips. The humans had done something that should have been impossible in modern warfare. They'd made 15,000 Coalition troops afraid to leave their fortified positions, afraid to patrol their own perimeter, afraid to sleep without wondering if human eyes were watching them dream. The cantina had grown completely silent around them. Even the background conversations had stopped as other patrons unconsciously listened to the old warrior's tale. "We evacuated Kepler 4 for Tubi because we could no longer function as a military unit," Vexstar whispered. "The humans never fired a shot at our positions, never destroyed a single piece of our equipment, never killed a single Coalition soldier. But they transformed us from hunters into prey, and prey cannot maintain a siege indefinitely." His compound eyes fixed on Crindle's recorder. "They let us leave unmolested." 300 humans had defeated 15,000 Coalition troops, without engaging in a single direct confrontation. That was our introduction to human persistence hunting, an ancient technique adapted for modern psychological warfare. Vexstar stood slowly, his massive frame casting long shadows across the cantina floor. "We thought we understood warfare, journalist. We thought we knew how intelligent species fought each other. The humans taught us that we understood nothing at all." The cantina's usual din had faded to hushed whispers as more aliens gathered around nearby tables, drawn by the weight of Vexstar's words. Even the bartender, a massive crystalline being from the outer rim, had stopped polishing glasses. To listen, the old commander's mechanical fingers traced patterns on the scarred table, following invisible ship trajectories that still played out in his nightmares. Titan's Gate, Vexstar began, his voice carrying across the now silent cantina. A nothing system on the edge of Coalition space. 2 gas giants, a handful of asteroids, and a strategic position that controlled 3 major shipping lanes. We'd been using it as a prisoner transfer point for 6 months. Crindle's recorder pulsed brighter, sensing the emotional resonance, building in the old warrior's voice. Around them, Alien patrons leaned forward, their various breathing apparatus and translation devices creating a symphony of mechanical whispers. The Drachmer was our newest prisoner transport, designed specifically for human captives. Reinforced hull, enhanced security systems, chemical pacification systems that could keep even the most aggressive humans docile during transport. Vextar's mandibles clicked in what might have been remembered satisfaction. 200 human prisoners aboard, mostly captured from the Kepler colonies. Officers, engineers, medical personnel, the kind of high-value assets that could be traded. For strategic advantages, the old commander paused to order another drink, his mechanical hand steady, despite the tremor in his voice. The Drachmer had suffered engine damage during a routine transfer. Nothing serious, just a few days in dock for repairs. We had 50 ships in the Fourth Fleet providing security destroyers, cruisers, fighters, more than enough firepower. To crack a small moon, Vextar's compound eyes reflected the cantina's dim lighting as he continued. Long-range sensors detected the human ship while it was still 3 light hours out. Single vessel, frigate class, designation unyielding. Our tactical computers calculated the odds instantly. 50 coalition warships against 1 human frigate. The outcome was mathematically certain. A server droid wheeled between the tables, its optical sensors recording everything for the stations. Security logs. Vextar ignored it, lost in memories of vacuum and starlight. Captain Kungsu should have run. Standard human naval doctrine clearly stated that rescue operations against overwhelming odds were not authorized without fleet support. Vextar's voice carried a note of grudging respect. Instead, he opened communications on all frequencies. Military, civilian, emergency bands, and broadcast a message that chilled every coalition officer who heard it. The cantina's environmental systems cycled quietly, but the silence among the patrons was absolute. Even species that didn't understand coalition standard could sense the importance of what they were witnessing. "This is Captain Kiangsu of the human vessel Unyielding," Vextar recited from memory. "The ship Drachmer is carrying 200 of our people. We're coming to bring them home. Any coalition vessel that interferes will be considered hostile. We don't want to fight you, but we will if we have to." Vextar's mechanical fingers clenched into a fist. "Not we'll attempt to rescue, or we'll try if conditions permit. Just a simple statement of absolute intent. We're coming to bring them home." As if the presence of 50 coalition warships was merely an inconvenience to be overcome, the Unyielding had begun its approach immediately after the broadcast, accelerating directly toward the coalition formation with no attempt at stealth or tactical maneuvering. Sensors showed the human ship's weapon systems powering up, shields at maximum, but no aggressive targeting locks. "They weren't coming to fight," Vextar explained. "They were coming to recover their people, and they'd go through us if necessary. But fighting wasn't the objective. That distinction made them more dangerous than any conventional military force." The first engagement had begun when coalition destroyers moved to intercept. The Unyielding responded with precise, surgical strikes, disabling weapon systems rather than destroying ships, targeting engines instead of life support. Every shot calculated to neutralize threats while preserving coalition lives. Seogen launched from the Unyielding in a maintenance pod while we were still trying to understand their intentions. Vextar continued. Space around the Drachmer was thick with weapons fire from 12 different coalition ships. Energy beams and plasma bolts turning the vacuum into a light show that would have been beautiful if it wasn't so deadly. The engineer had somehow navigated through the crossfire, his tiny pod weaving between destroyer-class plasma cannons and cruiser missile volleys. Coalition gunners had tried to target him, but shooting at a single-person maintenance pod while avoiding friendly fire proved nearly impossible. Seo Chen's pod took 17 direct hits during his approach. Vextar's voice carried traces of disbelief even decades later. His life support failed, his maneuvering thrusters were destroyed, and his suit was punctured in 3 places. He should have died in the first 30 seconds. Instead, the human engineer had continued his approach, using nothing but inertia and emergency thruster packs. When his suit's atmospheric seal failed, He'd worked in hard vacuum for 12 minutes, manually attaching breaching charges to the Drakmar S hull while plasma fire lit up the space around him. We watched him die, Vexstar whispered. What? His vital signs flatline on our scanners. Then watched him get back up and finish placing the charges before his backup oxygen finally ran out. But Seo Chen's sacrifice had only been the beginning, as the breaching charges detonated and opened access to the prisoner transport. The Unyielding had launched every small craft it carried: fighters, shuttles, maintenance pods, even escape. Capsules retrofitted with weapons and boarding equipment. Pilot Jahan Flu supply runs through our entire formation. Vexstar continued, his voice filled with something between admiration and horror. His fighter wasn't designed for extended combat, but he kept it operational for 4 hours, delivering medical supplies and cutting tools to the boarding teams while taking concentrated fire from every coalition ship in range. The pilot's tactics had defied conventional wisdom. Instead of trying to avoid enemy fire, Jahan had flown predictable patterns that made him easy to target, drawing coalition weapons away from the more vulnerable boarding craft. His fighter's hull had glowed cherry red from repeated plasma, strikes its armor ablating away in sheets of molten metal. Every time we thought we'd finally destroyed him, he'd appear from another angle. Vexter's mechanical arm gestured unconsciously, tracing flight paths through empty air. Radar showed him as destroyed. Thermal imaging showed nothing but expanding debris clouds. But somehow he kept flying, kept delivering supplies, kept drawing our fire. The rescue operation had taken on a surreal quality as coalition forces found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed more concerned with saving lives than taking them. Human boarding teams had cut through the Drakmar S security barriers with surgical precision. But instead of executing coalition guards, they'd administered medical aid to wounded personnel. Medic Yuna was the worst. Vexstar's voice cracked with remembered emotion. She was treating coalition wounded while her own people were still trapped in the detention cells. Enemy soldiers who'd been shooting at her for 6 hours, and she was trying to save their lives. The human medic had established a field hospital in the Drakmar's cargo bay, treating both rescued prisoners and injured coalition personnel with equal dedication. When coalition reinforcements had tried to retake the cargo bay, she'd positioned herself between the wounded and the fighting, using her own body as a human shield. She kept working while plasma bolts flew over her head, Vexstar continued. Kept treating patients while the deck plating around her glowed from weapons fire. One of our soldiers had taken shrapnel to the chest. She spent 20 minutes performing emergency surgery while her own people were dying in the corridors. Outside, the rescue had succeeded against all mathematical probability. All 200 human prisoners had been recovered, loaded aboard shuttles and escape pods, and transferred to the Unyielding while coalition forces watched in stunned disbelief. But the humans hadn't stopped there. They took 47 coalition personnel with them, Vexstar whispered. Wounded soldiers, unconscious crew members, anyone who needed medical attention that our field hospitals couldn't provide. They turned a military rescue into a humanitarian evacuation. The Unyielding had withdrawn from the system, carrying not just their recovered prisoners, but coalition wounded who required specialized treatment. Captain Kiansu's final transmission had been medical data on the coalition casualties along with coordinates where they could be safely recovered. We didn't lose ships that day, Vexstar concluded, his compound eyes reflecting the cantina's lights like fractured stars. We didn't lose equipment or strategic position or tactical advantage. We lost something far more important. He stood slowly, his massive frame casting long shadows across the silent cantina. Around them, dozens of alien species sat transfixed, many recording the testimony for their own archives. We lost the comfortable illusion that we were fighting a conventional war against a conventional enemy, Vexstar's voice carried to every corner of the room. The humans had shown us something that shouldn't exist in a rational universe, warriors who fought not for victory, but for love. Love of their people, their principles, their enemies' welfare. The old warrior picked up his drink with trembling fingers. After Titan's Gate, we knew we weren't just fighting humans. We were fighting against the very concept of unconditional loyalty. And that was a war we could never win. The cantina remained silent long after Vexstar finished speaking. the weight of his words settling over the assembled aliens like a heavy blanket. They'd come to hear war stories, but what they'd received was something far more profound, a glimpse into the heart of humanity itself. That wasn't the end, Vexstar added quietly, his voice barely audible above the cantina's environmental systems. That was just the moment we realized we were fighting something beyond our understanding, something that would change the very nature of warfare itself. The cantina's atmosphere had grown thick with tension, as if the very air was holding its breath. Crindle's recorder crystal pulsed with an urgent red glow, its memory bank straining to contain the emotional weight of Vexstar's testimony. Around them, alien patrons had abandoned their drinks entirely, their various breathing apparatus. Creating a symphony of nervous clicks and whispers, Vexstar's mechanical hand gripped his glass, so tightly that hairline cracks appeared in the metal. Table beneath it, his compound eyes had gone completely dark, each facet reflecting nothing but the deep void of space where the final battle had taken place. The war had been going on for 3 years, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 years of stalemate. Humans winning some battles, coalition forces winning others. Neither side could claim decisive victory, but coalition high command was growing impatient. The war was expensive, and the politicians back home were demanding results. The old warrior's scarred carapace rippled with remembered tension. Coalition. Strategists had studied every known species in the galaxy. The formula was always the same: apply pressure to civilian populations. And military forces would eventually capitulate to protect their non-combatants. It had worked on the Zephyrians, the Crystalline Confederacy, even the proud warrior clans of the Outer Rim. Crindle's stylus moved frantically across his datapad, but his eyes never left Vexstar's face. The other patrons in the cantina had moved closer, forming an unconscious circle around the old commander's table. Earth, Vexstar said, and the single word seemed to drain all warmth from the room. Oh, the human homeworld. 12 billion civilians, most of them living in massive cities that sparkled like jewels against the night side of the planet. Coalition intelligence had identified the primary population centers, calculated optimal strike patterns, prepared psychological warfare broadcasts. The plan had been elegant in its simplicity. Coalition forces would position themselves in Earth's outer system, demonstrate their overwhelming firepower against uninhabited moons and asteroids, then deliver an ultimatum: surrender all human military forces or watch their homeworld burn. Brought the 5th Grand Fleet, Vexstar continued, his voice carrying the weight of remembered anticipation. 800 ships, enough firepower to sterilize the surface of a dozen worlds. The humans had maybe 50 vessels in the Earth system, mostly patrol craft and orbital defense platforms. Even with their strange fighting techniques, the mathematics were clear. Coalition Admiral Vekfer had opened communications with Earth's planetary government exactly as planned. Standard surrender terms, reasonable conditions, guarantees of civilian safety in exchange for military capitulation. The transmission had been broadcast on every frequency, translated into every human language, impossible to ignore or misunderstand. The response came 12 hours later. Vexstar's mechanical fingers drummed against the cracked table. Not from Earth's government, not from their military command, not from any official source. It came from everywhere at once. The old warrior's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Every human military unit in the galaxy stopped what they were doing. It's not gradually, not after receiving orders, but instantly. Like someone had thrown a switch that connected every human soldier across thousands of star systems. Vexstar's compound. Eyes reflected the cantina's dim lighting like broken mirrors. General Dong Ho was leading a successful assault on the Vega colonies. His forces had broken through our defensive lines, captured 3 major installations, and were preparing to secure the entire system. Then the message came from Earth. The general had received the coalition ultimatum through intercepted communications. Within minutes, he'd abandoned his strategic position, loaded his entire army aboard transport ships, and begun the long journey toward Earth. No consultation with superiors, no strategic planning, no consideration of the tactical implications. Admiral. Hyung was even more dramatic, Vexstar continued. She was winning the largest space battle of the war at Centauri Prime. It's about to destroy the Coalition's third fleet and secure human control of the entire sector. Her forces had us surrounded, our ammunition was running low, our retreat routes were cut off. The human admiral had been moments away from total victory when the Earth transmission reached her fleet. She'd immediately broken off the engagement, allowing the badly damaged Coalition forces to escape while she redirected every ship toward humanity's homeworld. But the strangest part, Vexter's voice cracked with remembered disbelief, was the human prisoners in our detention facilities, soldiers who'd been captured months earlier, held in maximum security cells on ships scattered across the galaxy. They all started fighting at exactly the same moment. Coalition guards had reported simultaneous uprising attempts on dozens of prison ships. Humans who'd been docile and cooperative for months suddenly became violent, desperate, willing to die in hopeless escape attempts. Not because they expected to succeed, but because something had called them home. They weren't following orders, Vexstar emphasized, his mechanical arm gesturing wildly. There was no way for Earth to communicate with scattered military units. No central command structure that could coordinate such a massive response. It was like they were all part of one massive organism, and we just attacked its heart. Coalition forces had prepared for the human response, positioning additional fleets along likely approach routes, but nothing could have prepared them for what actually happened. The humans didn't come as organized military units, Vexstar continued. They came as individuals, in whatever ships they could find, carrying whatever weapons they could scrounge. Merchant vessels retrofitted with weapons, civilian craft loaded with volunteers, even single-person fighters making impossible journeys across interstellar space. Pilot Sang-woo had been the first to reach Earth's outer system, flying a mining ship that should never have been capable of interstellar travel. His vessel was barely functional, life support failing, weapon systems cobbled together from salvaged parts. But he'd arrived ahead of the main human fleet, and he'd arrived angry. Sang-woo's ship couldn't match our destroyer in firepower or armor. Vexter's voice carried a note of grudging respect. But he didn't need to win, just needed to send a message. He rammed the Kethmoran while broadcasting human music on all frequencies, something called Ararong, song about longing for home. The impact had been spectacular. The human ship had torn through the Coalition destroyer's hull like paper, its reactor detonating in a burst of light that could be seen from Earth's surface. But Sang-woo's sacrifice had accomplished something more important than military damage. He showed us that humans would rather die than see their homeworld threatened, Vexstar whispered. That was just the beginning. As more human forces arrived in the Earth system, the nature of the conflict changed completely. These weren't soldiers following tactical doctrine or strategic objectives. They were people defending their home, and they fought with a desperation that defied rational analysis. Sergeant Hyunju's unit was assigned to defend one of Earth's orbital platforms, Vexstar continued. When our assault troops breached their position, she ordered her squad to form a human wall between our forces and the civilian evacuation ships below. The human soldiers had linked arms and marched directly into Coalition plasma cannon fire, their bodies absorbing energy blasts that would have destroyed the evacuation craft behind them. They died singing, their voices carrying across the communication channels even as their bodies disintegrated. They fought like they were protecting their own children. Vexstar's voice broke completely. Every human, everywhere, treating each civilian as if they were family. Not because they were ordered to, but because that's what humans do when something threatens their home. The Coalition's overwhelming technological advantage had become meaningless in the face of opponents who measured success not in tactical victories but in lives saved. Human pilots flew suicide missions against Coalition capital ships there. Last transmissions always the same. Tell my family I love them. We found ourselves fighting an enemy that celebrated death, Vexstar concluded, his mechanical fingers trembling as he reached for his drink. Not because they wanted to die, but because they'd found something worth dying for. And that made them the most dangerous force in the galaxy. The cantina remained silent, the weight of Vexstar's words settling over the assembled aliens like a shroud. They had come to hear about military tactics and strategic victories. But what they'd received was something far more profound, a glimpse into the soul of a species that loved more fiercely than it hated. The battle for Earth lasted 6 days, Vexstar whispered. 6 days of watching humans transform themselves into something beyond our understanding, something that fought not for victory, but for the simple right to exist in a universe where love could triumph over logic. The old warrior's compound eyes reflected the cantina's lights one final time before he closed them, shutting out the present to focus on memories that would haunt him forever. That's when we knew the war was over, he concluded, not because we'd lost, but because we'd learned that some things are too sacred to destroy. The cantina's environmental systems had cycled through 3 complete atmospheric refreshes, but the tension in the air remained thick enough to cut with a plasma blade. Crindle's recorder crystal had grown so hot from processing emotional data that condensation was forming on its surface. Around them, representatives of dozens of species sat motionless, their various breathing apparatus, creating a symphony of mechanical whispers that sounded almost like prayers. Vexstar's mechanical hand had left permanent dents in the metal table, his grip tightening with each memory that surfaced from the depths of his war-scarred mind. The purple bioluminescent liquid in his glass had long since gone cold, casting eerie shadows across his compound eyes as he stared into its depths. The surrender, Vexstar began, his voice carrying across the hushed cantina like a death knell. That's what the official records call it. Coalition forces withdrawing from human space, signing peace accords, establishing diplomatic relations, clean, simple, politically acceptable. A server droid wheeled between the tables, its optical sensors recording everything for the stations. Archives. But even the artificial intelligence seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, moving with unusual quiet through the gathered crowd. The truth is messier, Vexstar continued, his scarred carapace rippling with remembered shame. The truth is that the Coalition High Command gathered an emergency session after the Earth engagement, and for the first time in galactic history, a military alliance sued for peace, not because they were losing, but because they were terrified of what winning might cost. Crindle's stylus had stopped moving entirely, his datapad forgotten as he listened. 2 words that would reshape galactic understanding of the human war. The young journalist finally understood that this interview had never been about historical documentation. "You're warning us," Crindle whispered, his voice barely audible above the cantina's ambient hum. "This whole time you've been warning the galaxy about humans." Vexstar's compound eyes fixed on him with laser intensity. "Finally, you understand?" "Yes, journalist. I'm delivering a warning that should have been broadcast on every frequency. It's translated into every language, carved into the memorial stones of every species that calls this galaxy home." The old warrior's mechanical fingers traced patterns on the table's surface, following invisible star charts that mapped the locations of humanity's scattered colonies. The Coalition made a fundamental error in our assessment of human military capability. We measured their ships, counted their weapons, analyzed their tactical doctrines. We thought we understood warfare. Around them, alien patrons leaned forward, unconsciously drawn by the weight of Vexstar's revelation. Crystalline delegate from the inner rim began recording with bioluminescent patterns across her translucent skin. A hive representative's antenna twitched nervously as it transmitted the testimony to distant colony ships. "But humans don't fight wars the way other species do," Vexstar continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "They don't calculate acceptable losses based on strategic objectives. They don't surrender when tactical mathematics proves defeat is inevitable. They don't fight for resources or territory or political advantage. They were witnessing something unprecedented, a coalition. War veteran publicly acknowledging the true reason for humanity's victory. They fight for love," Vexstar's voice cracked on the word. "Pure, irrational, mathematically impossible love. Love of their families, their homeworld, their ideals, even their enemies when circumstances require it. And that makes them the most dangerous military force the galaxy has ever encountered." The examples cascaded through Vexstar's mind like fragments of a nightmare that refused to fade. Captain Hanzal, continuing to fight with injuries that should have killed him, not because military doctrine required it, but because his people needed him to stand. Lieutenant Taman spending 18 months in psychological warfare, not for tactical advantage, but to protect his comrades trapped in the mountain complex. Captain Kyun-Soo's rescue at Titan's Gate, Vexstar continued, his mechanical arm gesturing unconsciously through space. Military analysts still study that engagement, trying to understand how one ship defeated an entire fleet. On tactics, weapon efficiency, strategic positioning, they missed the point entirely. The true lesson of Titan's Gate wasn't found in tactical manuals or strategic analysis. It was written in the actions of engineer Seo Jeon, who continued working in hard vacuum to save people he'd never met. It was demonstrated by pilot Jae Hyun, who flew supply runs through concentrated weapons fire because his comrades needed medical supplies. It was embodied by medic Yuna, who treated enemy wounded while her own people remained imprisoned. They turned a military engagement into a humanitarian mission, Vexstar whispered. Not because they were ordered to, but because that's what love does when it encounters suffering. It doesn't calculate odds or assess tactical advantages, it simply acts. Crindle's recorder crystal pulsed with urgent intensity, its memory banks, straining to contain the emotional resonance of Vexstar's testimony. The young journalist realized he was documenting not just history, but a fundamental truth about human nature that would reshape galactic politics for generations to come. The Earth engagement was our final lesson, Vexstar continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. When coalition forces threatened human civilian populations, we expected negotiation. We expected tactical consideration of acceptable losses. We expected rational military response based on strategic calculations. Instead, they had witnessed something that challenged the fundamental assumptions of interstellar warfare. Every human military unit across the galaxy had responded instantaneously, not through coordinated command structures, but through something deeper and more primal than military training. They fought like parents protecting their children. Vexstar's voice broke completely. Every human soldier, everywhere, treating every civilian as if they were family. Not metaphorically, not as propaganda, but with genuine familial love that transcended logic and military doctrine. The coalition's overwhelming technological superiority had become meaningless in the face of opponents who measured victory not in conquered territory, but in lives preserved. Human forces had willingly absorbed massive casualties to protect evacuation. Ships had flown suicide missions to destroy weapons platforms, threatening civilian populations, had died singing songs about home while their bodies disintegrated under plasma fire. We realized something that night, Vexstar continued. We were fighting against the very concept of unconditional love given physical form and armed with starships. The peace negotiations had begun within hours of the Earth engagement's conclusion, not because coalition forces were militarily defeated, but because coalition leadership finally understood what they were truly fighting against. You cannot kill love with plasma cannons, Vexstar stated with absolute certainty. You cannot conquer it with superior numbers. Cannot negotiate with it using standard diplomatic protocols. Love doesn't surrender when faced with overwhelming odds. It doesn't retreat when tactical position becomes untenable. It doesn't accept defeat when something precious is threatened. Around them, the cantina had transformed into an impromptu galactic assembly. Representatives of dozens of species recorded Vexstar's words, transmitted them to distant homeworlds, archived them in cultural memory banks that would preserve this moment for millennia. The peace treaty we signed, Vexstar's voice carried across the hushed space, was not a document of military surrender or political negotiation. It was an acknowledgement of fundamental truth. Humans are not just another species to be conquered or contained. They are something entirely different. The old warrior stood slowly, his massive frame casting long shadows across the cantina floor. His mechanical arm whirred softly as he reached for his drink, draining the last of the purple liquid that had sustained him through the telling of this tale. Every coalition species learned the same lesson, Vexstar concluded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Peace with humans is not maintained through military deterrence or political treaties. It is maintained by ensuring they never again feel the need to demonstrate what they become when something they love is threatened. Crindle stared at his recorder, finally understanding the true significance of what he had documented. This wasn't just a war veteran's testimony. It was a fundamental redefinition of humanity's place in the galactic community. Remember this. Journalist Vexter's final words echoed across the silent cantina. Share it with every species, every government, every military commander who thinks they understand warfare. Humans have shown us something that should not exist in a rational universe. Warriors who fight not for victory, but for love. And that makes them simultaneously the most peaceful and most dangerous species in the galaxy, the old warrior began. Walking toward the cantina's exit, his scarred carapace reflecting the emergency lighting that marked the station's night cycle. 8. But he paused at the threshold, turning back to address the assembled crowd one final time. The human war ended 20 years ago. Vexter's voice carried across the hushed space. But its real lesson is just beginning to be understood. We made peace not because we were merciful conquerors, but because we encountered something that cannot be conquered. Something that grows stronger when threatened, more determined when challenged, more unified when attacked. His compound eyes swept across the gathered aliens, ensuring his message reached every recording device, every cultural archive, every memory bank that would carry this warning to the stars. Humanity's greatest weapon was never their technology or their tactics, Vextar concluded. It was their capacity to love something more than their own existence. And that is why the galaxy must never, ever give them reason to use it again. Cantina doors sealed behind him with a soft pneumatic hiss, leaving only the lingering scent of ozone and the terrible understanding that they had all. Witness history being rewritten, not through military conquest or political maneuvering, but through the simple acknowledgement of a fundamental truth about human nature. Crindle sat alone with his recorder, staring at the crystal that now contained enough emotional resonance to power a small starship. He understood finally that his interview had accomplished something unprecedented it had given the galaxy. Its first honest glimpse into the heart of humanity itself. And what they had found there was both beautiful and terrifying beyond measure. The end.